Welcome, listeners and viewers far and wide, from Houston to Houston. I'm Eirik Gislason, Associate Broker and Team Leader of the Excelsior team at Brown Harris Stevens, Master Certified Negotiation Expert and Instructor, founder of Archway Partners Coaching, and your host of Shear Line Negotiation Mastery, the podcast bound and determined to reclaim and restore the good name of negotiation and unlock the door to value creation, win-win solutions, and the true power of integrative negotiation. Sometimes in life, you cross paths with someone who has the ability, the interest, and the instinct to make you better. A person who elevates you, helps you see that new path forward, and invests in your future. And it's not just you, everyone around them feels it. And that's the true mark of a leader. I had that experience about 10 years ago. At the time, I was about 10 years into the industry and coming out of a sales director role and standing at a real crossroads. I was burnt out and feeling stuck. I needed inspiration. I needed clarity. And to be honest, I wasn't even sure if I was going to stay in the real estate industry at all. What I did know was this: I was ready for a new start. So I took a big leap without a net. I left my previous firm and stepped into uncertainty with a few very clear non-negotiables. One of them mattered more than any of the others. I needed to work with a leader I respected and trusted, someone who cared about my development, not just my production, someone who was interested in who I was becoming, not just what I could deliver today. As much as I was interviewing for a job, I was interviewing leaders. And then something interesting happened. My wonderful friend and colleague, Carol Copeland, hi Care, had a purely chance conversation with someone and told him I was leaving and looking. That stranger, who happened to be in real estate, said to her, "Your colleague needs to speak to Richard Grossman at Halstead. Feel free to send me his resume and I'll make sure it gets to him." And I did. That introduction changed everything. Kismet is the right word, I think, or serendipity. Anyway, the word deserves to be a musical or a movie title from the 90s. From that very first meeting, the conversations with Richard were personal and meaningful, not perfunctory, not rushed, not transactional. I left feeling that something was happening, and I was excited about it. He had this ability to make you feel seen, to make you feel that you were the missing puzzle piece that completed the picture. Now, of course, that was objectively not true. I was not the missing puzzle piece, but that is exactly the point. Because how someone makes you feel in moments of uncertainty, transition, and vulnerability matters. As Maya Angelou famously said, people will forget what you said, they will forget what you did, but they will never forget how you made them feel. And as negotiators, as leaders, as people who work in a business built entirely on trust and relationships, there's a lot to learn from that. Influence happens in those moments of trust. And choices, life-changing choices, are made when the scales tip in favor of authenticity, trust, kindness, and vision. So today's conversation is not just about real estate. It's about leadership. It's about growth and how you build a career that lasts by making other people better along the way. And with that, we'll take our first break, and I'll be right back to introduce our special guest.
Looking to stage a property but on a tight budget and timeline? Stage with Stage and Fold. Stylish, lightweight, foldable, 3D printed cardboard furniture that looks real. Quick delivery and easy assembly. Staging starts at just $199 a month per room, and setup takes less than 30 minutes. Contact us today to stage smarter, sell faster, save thousands with Stage and Fold.
From residential and commercial closings to litigation, Romer DeBoss is your full-service real estate law firm. We blend big firm knowledge with boutique-level attention, delivering outcomes that exceed every expectation. Contact us at romerdeboss.com.
Welcome back. My guest, Richard Grossman, is an icon in the New York City real estate industry. He's an innovative, strategic leader in residential and commercial real estate with 4 decades of experience. Over the course of his career, Richard has been involved in the conversion of more than 30 rental buildings to cooperative and condominium ownership, and has been involved in literally thousands of residential and commercial transactions. Known as a strong leader, Richard has also been credited with mentoring several recipients of the Real Estate Board of New York's Rookie of the Year Award. Richard's career includes roles as president of Halstead Real Estate and Brown Harris Stevens, senior vice president and director of sales for Huron Properties, president of brokerage at Avenue 8, and the director of sales for Hahn and Mann Realty, Inc. In his personal time, Richard's an avid traveler, fitness enthusiast, and collector of contemporary and modern art. Richard's the past president of the Brevoort East and the past board member of the Butterfield House and New York City AIDS Memorial. He is currently a board member and chair of the development committee of the Storm King School, a private boarding and day school in the Hudson Valley. He's a graduate of Syracuse University and received a diploma in real estate analysis from New York University. Richard, I am honored to have you on Shear Line, and I'm so glad that you're here.
Thank you very much, Eric. Those are very kind words, and coming from you, they mean quite a lot.
Well, thank you. You have shaped the second half of my 20-year career in real estate in a way that I hope you know. We've had many, many conversations, and I hope you know the impact you've had on my career, but more importantly, the impact that you've had on the careers of thousands of agents over your career in real estate.
Thank you. That means a lot to me, and it certainly is nice to hear. And it's meaningful. It's in life, it's important that you try to do the right thing and make a difference in people's lives, and whether that's what life is about, making the world a better place.
Well, I think our audience today is going to get to know you even more. A lot of them already know who you are, but hopefully they'll get some insights that a lot of us who have worked very closely with you have had the pleasure of gaining. So I'm going to jump right in so that we can get the most out of this time together. And I want to start with this framework that you have. You often reference this framework that you call the Trinity. Can you walk us through what that means and why it matters?
Sure. So when I think about real estate and think about success in real estate, I think about something and I call it my Trinity. It has 3 points to it. You need to win, you need to make money, and you need to control the deal. And I believe those 3 things are related. And let me sort of explain what they mean and maybe a little bit what they don't mean. So when I say we win, we should win fairly and honestly. We don't win because we're the biggest person in the room, going to knock everyone out of the way. You look at me and you know me, that's never been the way that I win. I win because I want to use the resources I have at my control. I want to develop my skills, to use my skills in a transaction to help my client achieve what they want to achieve. And I want to be, at the end of the day, we need to sort of have be goal-oriented and understand where we're going and what it means to achieve what we need to achieve for our clients. When I say we want to make money, we're real estate agents, we're real estate brokers, and we work basically on commission. And we have to understand that we have value to the transaction, and that value needs to be rewarded appropriately for the transaction. It doesn't mean that we're a taximeter, that we turn the meter on every time we have a conversation with someone. But at the end of the day, we have to understand that there's something in this for us, that we have value and we add value, and that we need to be compensated appropriately for that. And there's nothing wrong with saying that, and there's nothing wrong to discussing that with your clients up front. I think they will respect you for that. I think that having a financial conversation sometimes about ourselves sometimes can be the hardest conversation to have, but we shouldn't shy away from it. And the last part of the Trinity, which is the biggest part of the Trinity, which is controlling the deal. And this is, if people will, who've seen me speak over the years, shout out to me when they see me on the street, control the deal, control the deal. And this is really about understanding that a deal has a life, and it starts from point A to point Z. And along those points, what you negotiate and what you get people to agree or not to agree to makes a large difference in terms of the outcome. So that if you want to have a deal that goes smoothly for your client, you need to be able to ask the right questions, get commitments from the buyer or the seller along the way, depending on who you represent, and bring the deal forward. That comes from having skill sets. It's for having knowledge of the business. It's understanding the how deals progress. It understands problems that can come up and trying to avoid those problems. I think that's really where I learned most of this from. How do you avoid the problems on the next deal that you learned on the last deal? Because these problems, they look a certain way, and there are things you can do to avoid them if you get commitments and understand the nuances of what you're talking about. Because this business, at the end of the day, it's not easy. It has a lot of nuances to it. And understanding those nuances and being a master of those nuances will make you more successful and when I say more successful, I'm saying more successful for your client, whether you're representing a buyer or a seller, and helping them achieve what they want to achieve.
I love that so much because it's so collaborative. And that's one of the things that I've loved about you for the last 10 years is that you're so collaborative, but you're also, you're strong. The position that you take, and this Trinity is really, there's a lot of power in it and there's a lot of confidence in it. And then the other thing that I love that you were talking about is that almost like a segmented approach. Like if you control the deal from segment to segment, what you gain or what you achieve, it almost starts to just branch out. And so you see that elevation of what the end result is because you have that control throughout the process.
Right. And it's about asking the right questions and getting the right things up ahead of time. And, asking the right questions is not always easy, but not asking the right questions can be, fatally horrible in a transaction because you have surprises. I don't want surprises. I want to manage expectations along the way and manage the process. And it's a little bit understanding, what can go wrong and understanding what can go right and trying to direct the transaction. And at the end of the day, the broker has only so much control. So controlling the deal sort of flips that and tries to give us the control that we don't inherently have in the transaction. We're not the decision makers. We're not a buyer or a seller. But we can have a lot of influence in the transaction if we know what we're talking about. And that can manifest itself in so many ways: buyer representation, seller representation, through negotiations, from qualifying. I mean, there's it hits every aspect of a real estate transaction as far as I'm concerned.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Well, so, we've all gotten a lot of advice from you. But what is one impactful or one of the most impactful pieces of advice that you've received, and how has it shaped the way that you operate today?
So the best advice I got was I was probably in my early 20s, maybe 21 or 22 years of age, something about that point. And the husband of one of my mother's first cousins was a very successful businessman. And he was at that point in his 70s, and he actually lived to, I think, 103, 104, which is kind of interesting. But he gave me the best piece of advice. His name was Julie Lashnick, and he, at that point in his career, was working for the Brodsky organization because his family and the Brodsky's family went back a couple generations. And this is a man who today would be 120 years old. So we're talking about people going back, to the 19th century. And but Julie had one point had a large accounting firm, and he used to have, this is back in the 40s and 50s, and he used to have the guys who worked for him, and they were men back in those days. He used to say to them, "I'm going to pay you twice a week," and they were like, "What do you mean by that?" He says, "I'm going to pay you a paycheck at the end of the week. You're going to take that home, feed your family, pay your rent, and live off of that. But I'm also going to pay you in the knowledge I'm going to convey to you, and whether you get that knowledge or not, that will be up to you, but no, I have it to give." And he said to me, and it sort of started my career, I've never took a job ever that I took it for the money. I always took it for what can I learn from doing this, and what opportunities can I make out of it. And and I'm not talking about from a like when I say opportunities, I'm talking about educational opportunities. And I've always looked at things from a learning perspective, and that the skills we develop are in this industry are lifelong skills, and there's something we're always working on. As my friend Paul Massey says, you learn half of what you need to know your first half in your first year in the business, and you learn the rest of what you need to know in the other half in the rest of your career.
Oh gosh, yeah.
And the business changes, and your skill sets have to change. But this is cumulative, and you can bring this up over time. So learning and developing your skill set makes you a better broker, and also makes you more valuable to the people you want to represent. And that's a very different sort of mindset than, say, sort of the flashy brokerage that seems to be popular, that goes through periods of being popular or not popular at times. But it's really understanding what's this business, and how do you really represent somebody in a way that's meaningful and helps them achieve what they want to achieve, because this is a tricky business. And I will tell you specifically, I'm not going to say only New York, but New York, where we have multifamily housing, we have cooperatives and condominiums, we have lots of, very local laws. This is a tricky business, and understanding and navigating that correctly, takes a lot of skill and a lot of experience.
So talking about that skill set, how do you think that agents and negotiators should approach learning and skill building over the course of their careers?
I think they should be open. They should keep their eyes and ears open and be open to learning and asking questions and making sure they're asking the right person the question. Sometimes I see, this is not just agents in life. Sometimes people ask questions of someone that's convenient without necessarily going to the right person. And getting the right person who is, and reaching out to that through your sphere of influence to get you the right answer is really what it's all about. And it's about going to the source. It's about getting that. As an example, this is going back a few years ago, and this is a very specific piece of information, but there was a set of buildings in the West Village that were sort of transitioning from a Mitchell Lama housing to private cooperatives, and there was a lot of cadence about what was happening, known or not known about it at the time. And, I knew the accountant who happened to have for the building, and I was able to call him up and I said, could you tell me what's going on? So it's going in, it's about developing a sphere of influence and being able to reach out to somebody. I didn't hear from somebody on the street. I didn't hear from someone who might have done a deal or had a listing there. I heard it from the accountant and was able to get real information. And that's really what, that's another part about developing your sphere of influence. But that was key about going to the right person to get the right answer for this particular property to help our buyer. I think we were representing a buyer there, make an informed decision.
It's interesting with that idea of going to the right person. Right now, we're kind of in this. Well, as technology develops, AI, even Google searches. I mean, this is not new. This idea of having information at your fingertips, but that idea that it is easy to get information, but the information that you're getting may not be the information that you need. I think there's a big danger and a big useful skill for us as agents to understand that the easiest information is not necessarily going to get us where we need to go.
I would agree with that 100%. I'm going to add to that as well. The context of that information. I have not seen AI understand context. And one of the things that we as humans and people with experience will be able to look at this and say, yes, this is great information, but let's put it into the bigger context of understanding what's going on here and not just looking at it from something that's scraping and putting together public information. There's context and there's information that's a bigger picture that's going to give you a more informed decision and a more informed, opinion on something.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, switching gears a little bit here, when we talk about agents staying top of mind with their sphere of influence, what does it actually take for an agent to remain top of mind and genuinely useful and relevant to their sphere of influence?
I think there are a few things. Number one is providing your clients with real information. So you have to be an information provider, being someone who's going to give them value. Number one, but number two is I would also say be a connector, be a value to them. There's a guy named Roger Horshaw, and Roger Horshaw is an American businessman. He had a couple different businesses, but he was sort of known as a connector, and he brought people together. And if the one thing that people know about me is I bring people together, and it's about, and it's not about bringing them together because what's in it for me. Although, I'm going to say inherently by bringing people together, they inherently become part of your universe. So there is something value to me to do that. But it's not why I do it. I do it because I really believe that so-and-so should meet so-and-so and it would be good for their businesses. I don't say what's good for me about it.
Right.
But because of that, I also become sort of the nucleus of a world where people that sort of travels through me. They'll remember who connected them. They'll remember me for something in the future if something comes up, and that's part of how you do it. You do it just because, hey, I'm trying to sort of be the connector of people. And at the end of the day, this is a people business. There's an old saying, 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, and people used to say, and I'll give this actually to Sarah Rotter, used to say it's 2 degrees of Richard Grossman. Knowing people is the job of our business, and it's about knowing people, connecting people, doing it in an honest way, doing it in an authentic way, and doing it in a way that they understand that this isn't, you're not looking for something out of it for yourself. You're really doing it because you're really trying to bring people together that's going to help them create value. It creates value for you because people remember you as doing something good for them, and they'll remember you in the context of of usually if it's real estate or other things that, hey, this is a good person to reach out to. Let me reach out to him, what his thoughts on. Let me see if there's something he can help me with, and so forth. And it's a way to get known. And it's something where, I'm a big believer that we should constantly be connecting with people, having coffees with people, lunches with people. There's a reason why we can write off our expenses, our entertaining expenses, because, it's tax season right now. We can write it off because this is good for our business. And the more we do it, the more we're out there. If you just think about doing it, or if you wish you could do it, you're not. It's not going to happen. And sometimes it's just putting people together, or putting yourself out there, and just being genuinely interested in people. I mean, I have to say it's something. Maybe I'm a geek in this way, but I'm genuinely interested in what people are doing and what their lives are, what they're thinking, and if you have a genuine interest in people, I think that will come back to you and make that a little bit easier for some of those things to happen.
Yeah, that genuine interest, that curiosity is so important. But we're going to take a break. I'm going to connect you with a couple of our sponsors, and we'll be right back. I have a story to share with you on that connection piece right after this.
Okay.
I'm Brian Scott Cohen, one of the top loan originators in the country, and the #1 mortgage originator at Guaranteed Rate Affinity. Guaranteed Rate Affinity arguably has the most advanced tech in the industry. Our completely digital loan process makes it easy and efficient for homeowners, from a 15-minute pre-approval to the digital application and through closing. My team and I would love to help you get into the home of your dreams.
Hi, it's Stephen Bailey from Roadway Moving and Storage. Listening to Vince Rocco, you know the right partner makes all the difference. At Roadway, we deliver an experience your clients will love. For specialized services and white glove care, choose Roadway. Want to learn more? Email me at steven@roadwaymoving.com or visit roadwaymoving.com.
All right, and we are back. Now, I mentioned there was a story, and Richard talks about this idea of being a connector and being authentic and connecting with people. One of the interesting things about the story I told with Carol Copeland connecting me with a gentleman that she met walking into a building, it turns out that person was in real estate. And when I did send the resume to him and he passed it on to Richard, I sat down with Richard, and it turns out that person that sent the resume, it wasn't that the two of you had this lifelong connection. The two of you had actually met, I think, only a month or two earlier at some networking event or some sort of a party. But the fact that you made that impression on that person that led to me being connected with you, I feel so fortunate. I think it's such a testament to the impact that you make in making those connections. So thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm gonna move on here, and I want to talk about top producing agents. You've mentored and directed so many top producing agents in our field. So from your experience with working with top producing agents, what separates those who rise from the top and stand out from everyone else?
It's a good question. I would say #1 is they have a plan. They're not just coming in this as on a half-baked idea. They have a plan. They have a business plan about what they're trying to accomplish, whether it's well developed or just a skeleton of a business plan. But they know where they're going. They have they're willing to have systems in place to help them grow their business. They have they have the ability to learn from their mistakes, because I will tell you, we all make mistakes in this world. And, the only people that I always say that don't make mistakes are people that don't do anything. And that's the biggest mistake of them all. Right. We all make mistakes. Okay. And I think that, the top producing agents, they put themselves out there and they go after things. They're organized. They have a very clear message. They know their value to the transaction. They know what their competitive value in a situation is, and I will say this, and they will also know when maybe, isn't the right thing for them. They're not out there chasing, windmills about things that maybe aren't, isn't the best use of their time, but they're working on transactions that, they know they can accomplish, and at the end of the day, they'll be successful at. And good agents are good networkers. They're good. They promote themselves well. They know how to. They know how to do some of the things. They develop their skills to be able to complete transactions, because at the end of the day, it's really about getting the transaction completed. It's not just about getting an offer in or getting more buyers or more sellers. It's about completing deals, and they're very good about knowing what they need to do to get that done. And that comes from experience. It comes from skill development. It comes from having, knowing the business, having, knowing their strengths and so forth. And I would tell you that, what's nice about this business is that, from a personality point of view and from a business point of view, that there's a mosaic of what makes someone successful. I mean, your success looks very different than, someone else's success in the business, but it doesn't mean that it's not exclusionary. It doesn't mean that your success excludes their success. There's a lot of opportunity for a lot of people to be successful based upon who they are. I'm going to go back to, early on in my career, I used to have two different types of clients that used to be attracted to me. And one of those were empty nesters who were either, buying or trading in New York City or moving into New York City, people who at that time, were in their 60s, and they looked at me as just like and they saw a bit of themselves in me when they were my age, and I was 30 or 35 years younger than them. And the other thing is I also had a lot of single women who looked at me like as a kid brother and just liked working with me. And so it's a little bit is know who your niche of your market is, and know who you can relate to. It doesn't mean that you should, I'm not saying that in an exclusionary sense, but in a sense of that maybe, as an example, I used to have an agent of mine, this is going back years ago, and she's unfortunately had some health issues, but she used to work really well with, young women starting out in, husbands and wives, newly married couples and so forth. And she would be able to have a conversation with them that I could never have. And one of it was, this is, back in the day, they wanted a 5 or a classic 6 apartment, but they could only afford a 4.5. And she says, this year I'm selling you a 4.5. When you or your husband make partner in the law firm, come back to me. We'll get you the classic 6 on Park Avenue.
I love
that type of thing. That was not something that was going to resonate with me. Yeah. But she had a presence about her and a way about her that she could have that conversation with them. So a little bit is know who's going to who you work with well, and who you are, that you can, and how you attract the right person. Obviously, you want to make it as broad as possible, but also understand who that person is and who's going to relate to you and so forth.
Yeah. Yeah, and taking back, you were talking about that building, the making mistakes and learning from your mistakes. I mean, this is kind of a through line, it seems, from the advice that you give. When you mention it with controlling the deal, that idea that, look, controlling the deal also involves the fact that you learn from those things and you build on those things. Then you talked about half of what you learn is in the first year, and then the rest of it comes in the rest of your career. And then moving on to this about what top producers do, all of it seems like you've got to continue to build and learn from the things that you do, and take massive action, or take action in order to continue to build and grow in your career, whether you're 10 years in or 2 months in.
Absolutely. I'm going to say I came into this business, I was very young. And so for me, I spent a lot of my first 10 years in this business, building my career, but learning and I was hungry for knowledge and skills and develop my skills. And as a leader, as a sales director, I saw agents who were very successful back in the 80s and 90s. And then, what happened in the late 90s, early aughts, is we had more co-broking in the industry. And these were agents who were very successful about having one property, selling it or representing, but they weren't so good about living in a world with co-broking. When that changed, I saw just groups of agents whose business just died because they didn't transition as the business changes. And listen, there's been a lot of changes in our business the last couple of years, especially with buyer representation and so forth. And it doesn't mean that people won't be successful, but if you're only going to act the way you acted 10 years ago, you can't expect to be succeed, because the business changed, and you have to adapt. You have to, and change also brings opportunity for people. Let's not lose sight of that fact. And and at the end of the day, there's still buyer representation in the industry. Is it done differently than it was done before? Yes. Are we saying things differently to our buyers than we said before? Perhaps we are. We are saying things differently, but it's still out there, and there's still a value for a buyer to be represented by a broker.
Absolutely.
And I think there are people who were afraid that would go away, but I wasn't. but you have to understand the skill you're bringing and the reasons why, and you have to be able to articulate it. You just don't assume your buyer is going to know that. And I think that if you get to know your buyers, or if they come through a recommendation and you get to know them over time, they will see what your value is. But you have to have some value to give.
Yeah. That idea of building trust with every single client that you're working with, whether they're someone who comes to you cold that you have not met before, or whether they were a part of a network or a past client or referral, that trust piece is so incredibly important.
And think about where trust comes from. It comes from being authentic. You used that word earlier.
Yeah.
It comes from being, who you are. It's coming from clues about are you dressing in a professional way? Are you answering emails, in a timely manner, or texting back in a timely manner? And are you being clear in your answers? And if you don't know something, no one expects everyone to know everything. But if you don't know something, say, listen, you know what? That's a good question. I'm going to reach out and get some counsel, because there's a couple ways to look at it and find out what the right answer is and come back to them. Because listen, this isn't black and white, and there are lots of gray in this thing, but there are things that you can do to make that gray a little bit clearer and so forth, a little bit more clearer for someone, and or say, listen, we don't know what the end result's going to be, and understand what that is. I mean, there are even, or the end result may be a process rather than 2 steps, and make sure they understand that as well.
Yeah, and I would imagine that in an ideal world, having that deep network, those people that kind of gets you further along that conversation, and that authenticity reads so much with the people that you have in your network. So given that, what advice would you give to professionals who want to build those meaningful networks as opposed to just collecting contacts?
I would say it takes a lot of work in some senses, but it's about building relationships one-on-one. Be involved. Number one, be involved in your community, whatever that community looks like for you. So, because people are going to want to, people will get to know you in a way that's not necessarily real estate related, but they'll see how you act as a person, and they're going to get a feeling, hey, is this somebody that I trust, I like, and I would feel comfortable working with? And number one. Number two is, just put yourself out there and be authentic. Build relationships, make sure they understand that, that you're not looking at this just what it's in it for you. I think that comes across in our business, very inauthentic, and people see through that very quickly. Yeah. Not to say there aren't people out there who that's who their personality is and they're successful. There are, but I would still say that's more the exception than the rule. I think the rule is people are working with people that that are genuinely trustworthy, and and they get to know them as people, and and who they are and what they and what they believe in.
Yeah. Well, what's your approach for asking questions? You talked about that curiosity and asking questions of the right people, but asking those questions that will get you further. What approach do you have to asking questions that leads to deeper understanding and better outcomes?
Well, first of all, don't assume you know everything. So I got to say, and don't be afraid to say, listen, I'm curious about something, or I don't understand the process. Could you explain something to me? Could you help me understand a situation better? Don't be afraid to be a little vulnerable about asking questions, because, people will, I think that's just, I think people will relate to that, and I think people will be open to helping that. And I think also try to, one of the things, and being tactful about things. I mean, one of the things is, sometimes we have to have very tough conversations in this business, and I think that there is a art to being sort of tactful about it, about going in and say, listen, you know what, I'm going to have just being upfront. I need to have a hard conversation. We're going to talk about, your qualifications, your financials, and I need to put some things into some perspective or context about how that looks for a co-op or for a condominium or for a certain type of building that has a higher down payment requirement or whatever the case may be. Let's try to understand how that's going to work. But don't be afraid to have that conversation, because quite frankly, I think people respect it, and be respectful when you're asking these questions, but also, but sometimes these are necessary questions to ask. You can't, when we deal with New York City cooperatives and condominiums, you need to ask questions like, what, how much down payment, what's your post-purchase liquidity, what's your debt to income ratio, where's the money coming from? Have you earned it on your own, or is it a gift from your parents? All these things make a difference. And if you just come in blazing, like, if you don't, in a way that, that sort of bowls everyone over, I think people will take, umbrage about that. But if you take it away, explain what the process is, tell them, that you're there as their advocate if you're representing them as a buyer, or about what they need to do, and try to have a conversation, because having a conversation about someone else's personal finances is a very, it's a very touchy situation, but it's a very necessary situation in the business we do. You want to make sure that if they're interested in a property, that they can financially pass the requirements of what you think the building, or not what you think, but what the building requires.
Right. And ultimately, it's in their interest, right? Everything that you're doing is to serve their interests.
Absolutely.
By doing that. You mentioned the phrase "help me understand," and in negotiation, we oftentimes will lead with those questions: "Tell me" or "help me understand," because it actually empowers, or it places the power on the person across from you, because you're asking them for help. You're asking them to do something for you, as opposed to what a lot of agents will do, and you mentioned this, where they come in guns a-blazing and they're telling the other person, this is how it is. I know because I've been there before, and it really shrinks the power for the person across from you, as opposed to saying, help me understand.
I use, when I talk about negotiation, I always try to use the image of, you ever try to chase a ball in a pool? When you try to chase a ball in a pool, what happens? It goes away, okay? It's better to be there and to try to get the ball to come to you. Think about that in negotiations. If you're going to chase the person in negotiations, you're going to be chasing them forever. You have to think about how do you get them to come to you rather than you to them, and that takes it's an art. There's no, and people are so different, and you may not be able to do that with everybody. There are people out there that are masters of the universe, so to speak, and think they know it all and control all. But at the end of the day, this is how you said, use the word collaborative. This is a collaborative business. We do deals together, and we need each other. And at the end of the day, how do we do that in a way that is win-win? That term, we both use it. Win-win for everyone in this transaction. It shouldn't just be me winning and you losing. Right. It should be, we should all get something out of the table. And at the end of the day, our clients may, they make a decision. Is this something, to win, they have to come up in price. To win, they have to do this. Yep. That's a decision they make. I mean, and you can give them context, you can give them some opinion on that. But at the end of the day, are you getting them where they need to be?
Well, I think that's a perfect place to leave this section, or this segment of the podcast. I'm going to move on to one of my favorite parts of the podcast, what I call the lightning round, so that we get to know a little bit more about you personally, which I love. So first we have to cue the theme music. All right, now we're in lightning round. So I know that I love the fact that you're a leader who is also a lifetime learner. So what book or books would you recommend to our audience that have helped shape you as a leader?
So, there's so many. So first of all, I'm going to go with the book, Getting to Yes. We've talked about this before. Yeah. It's The Art of Negotiation. I actually took a class at NYU probably 35, 40 years ago. They had a whole class on this at NYU, just on that specific book. It's about win-win negotiation. At the end of the day, I believe it's the basis of everything. You have to understand not only winning for yourself, but you have to make sure the other guy gets to win as well. Yeah. Everyone should be able to walk away. Now, it doesn't mean you get everything you want, but it means you should understand what core you want and understand what core they need, and try to get as close to that as possible to make it the successful negotiation. Yeah. If I win and the other person is vanquished and they don't get anything they want, that only lasts so long. And honestly, it's and I'm not talking about dollars and cents, but I'm talking about, because sometimes negotiation is not always pretty in terms of dollars and cents, but the other person needs to feel they got something out of the transaction as well. Yeah.
On that, before you go to, if you have another one, that obviously William Ury and Roger Fisher, I think that book is an incredible asset to any negotiator. But what you talked about, that idea of creating value, and starting with the other side, understanding what it is, what needs they're trying to meet. Not that you can guarantee that you're going to give them those things, those value elements, but understanding what the other side's area of concern is, so that you can try to build a negotiation that is going to lead to something where they feel that they're adequately satisfied, as William Ury and Roger Fisher talk about, and that idea that we don't negotiate there's not one negotiation in a real estate transaction. There are several. And when you set up that first negotiation in a way that the other side feels adequately satisfied, you run less of a risk of entrenchment or retreat or retribution in subsequent negotiations. The repairs, the inspection, the closing table, the appraisal, all of those are subsequent negotiations that we need to be aware of as negotiators.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And make sure you're negotiating what your client's interest best at heart. As an example, maybe if I'm selling because I want to buy something, maybe getting the top price isn't my priority,
right,
but getting the strongest candidate as the buyer is my priority, because it's not about getting the last $10,000 or $20,000 or $100,000.
Yeah.
If I need this money for me to complete my next transaction, and if that's not clear in the negotiations, you have a misaligned. Where are you going with it? You're misaligned. And that also may understand if I have a buyer that's a very strong buyer with a seller needs a very strong seller, that may help me win over a buyer that's willing to pay more money, but isn't as strong of a candidate to complete the transaction. At the end of the day, it's completing the transaction, not just getting the highest price. Highest price, right, best terms, but that's part of that.
Yeah.
The other book, I'm going to throw out another book, which is Will Garda. He's one of the founders or one of the owners, second owners of 11 Madison Park, the restaurant here in New York City on Madison Square. He wrote Unreasonable Hospitality, The Remarkable Power of Giving People More Than They Expect. At the end of the day, think about how you can do more for people and how you can give them more and how you could be, and think about, servicing and being of service to people and giving them more than they want. And I think that's an incredible book that he goes into some great examples in his own career about doing that. And I think that at the end of the day, we're a service business. And, my husband often says, we have to remember we're the people behind the counter at Harrods. We're not the people in front of it. And a lot of times in our industry, and this is in all sales industries, I will see this in other industries as well, where we think we're the client. We're not the client. We're the service provider to the client. Doesn't mean that we're subservient, but it means we're servicing them and their needs. And that's really important. At the end of the day, how do you want to be serviced when you go to a store, when you go to buy something? Someone's there helping you make your decision, helping you get what you want, whatever that may be.
Oh, I love that. I love that. All right. Well, I mentioned at the opening that you are a collector of contemporary and modern art. So do you have a favorite artist or work?
So I'm going to throw this out there. So yes, my favorite artist is a photographer named Peter Hujar. He died of AIDS in the late 1980s. His work sort of, in his own lifetime, he wasn't necessarily the most known, although he was known to a certain group of people known at the time. But since that period of time, his name has gotten more and more famous, and I have a particular work by him. I have 4 works by him, but I have 2 of particular note. I have Candy Darling on her deathbed, which is Candy Darling, she was the mentioned in the song, Candy came in from Long Island. She was everyone's darling. That's Candy Darling. And she died in the early 70s. She was one of the first sort of transsexuals, transvestites, they called them back then. And it's a great photograph and so forth. There's a couple of versions, but I have one of the harder versions to get. And I also have Christopher Street Pier 2, 1976. Again, this was a gay artist, and he took pictures on Christopher Pier back in the 70s when he was alive, in 80s. And so he is my, owning those 2 pieces were kind of special. I have them hanging in my bedroom. I have a lot of art. Those are just 2 pieces, but I love living with contemporary art, and and some of the pieces I've bought over the years are things I never thought I would be able to ever, in my wildest imagination, think I'd own art by these artists. So.
Oh, that's amazing. That's fantastic. All right, and also I know you love travel. And in my experience, dining with you, quaint and charming dining spots. So given the choice, where in the world are you, and what's the name of the restaurant?
So I'm in Paris, and I'm at a lot of different restaurants in Paris. Okay. But I'm going to give you a restaurant in Paris that's not very well known. La Cordonnière means the shoemaker, and it's below a church on just off Rue Faubourg Saint-Honoré, right in the second in Paris. It's owned by a friend of mine, Hugo. So I call the restaurant Hugo's. More colloquially, I call it Hugo's. The restaurant is about, I don't know, 6 tables, including 2 tables that are in the kitchen, which is also the entrance of the restaurant, which is very open and so forth. And you'll see Hugo cooking your meals in there. And if you're lucky enough, you could just say, make me something that you feel that you should be making me today. And I'll surprise you with a few dishes. You don't do that if you're a picky eater, because you end up with some things you don't want. But I'm in Paris and I'm eating French food. I mean, to me, Paris is my happy place.
So if I go, do I want one of the tables in the kitchen? Is that where you
definitely
want to be?
tables in the guest? So the tables in the kitchen are smaller, so you may need 2 of them, or because there's both of them. There's just 2 of them there, and there's a little tiny table. Like if I don't have a reservation, and I show up, he puts me at this like little tiny table. But if I'm by myself, but he has 2 tables that would each fit about 4 people each. So if you're more than 4, you'd probably get 2 of the tables. You definitely want to be in the kitchen because you get to watch him cook the meal. And he's an incredible chef, and the restaurant's only open up 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. It's not open on the weekends, and it's and this type of restaurant in Paris where you have a sole chef / owner that runs the restaurant is more typical. You'll see there. We don't really see that here necessarily. For me, it got a little getting used to just being in Paris that there are a lot of restaurants that close on the weekends, and you're like, how is that possible? And but there they do have that, and that's probably one of my I would definitely send you there. And but that said, I can Paris has the best restaurants, whether it's there or it's Diana Vreeland's favorite restaurant, which was Georges de Mal, Cafe George on Rue de Mal, which is you go for a steak and very traditional sort of bistro French food. That's one of my favorite. Or Chez Paul. I mean, you can't go wrong in Paris.
All right. Well, I want to be at all of these restaurants right now. I'll tell you.
Hi, I'm Dylan Pachulik, CEO of XL Real Property Management, New York's most trusted name in luxury property management since 2012. We specialize in managing individual apartments, townhouses, and rental buildings held by absentee owners. We maintain our properties with the highest standards of quality and service so that owners can choose a hassle-free approach to real estate investing. Rented or owner-occupied, we handle it all. For more information, contact us at xl-rpm.com.
Okay, I'm going to ask you one last question before I ask where people can reach out to you if they want to connect with you. There have been a lot of changes in our real estate industry. We mentioned a couple of them, especially over the last couple of years. But you've been consulting for real estate markets like the Czech Republic recently. What's that market like?
So let me tell you. So there's a lot of differences. First of all, they speak Czech. No, but there's a lot of, they do speak some English as well. But I will tell you, I've been several times the last year in a room full of real estate agents in the Czech Republic. And I will tell you that other than the fact that, the people are speaking a different language, come from a different culture, I see people that I can relate to. And I would tell you, if I plugged them out and plugged them in New York City, they would fit perfectly. So I see a lot of commonalities no matter where you are. The big difference there versus here is there's not a lot of buyer representation. And I'll give you a little joke, and it became a little bit of a thing. One of the first things I did with this group of agents when I was there was talk to them about the advantages of buyer representation. And I talked about, I used the term fiduciary, and so the fiduciary is kind of a big English word, and I use this thing. So I said to them, as a seller's broker, you have a fiduciary to the seller, but I asked the question, who has a fiduciary to the buyer? And I get a room full of people, like there are about 30 people in the room, and they look at me like, what does fiduciary mean? So I'm like, okay, so I used a word that doesn't translate so well. So luckily there's a woman there who's an attorney, and she's a friend of mine. She works for the bank that we're having this conference at. And I said to her, do you have is fiduciary a term you use? And that is a concept there, but it's not really a concept that real estate agents have used. And they sort of came back to me, well, the reply to me, fiduciary means, that means you're supposed to be nice to the buyer. And I'm like, well, as I said, I think you should be nice to everybody, but fiduciary is a higher level of allegiance to someone. So there are things about buyer representation, and whether they'll go to buyer representation there or not, I don't know. But keep in mind that this country, as a democracy and as a capitalist democracy, is essentially 30, 35 years old. Their systems are kind of new, and you still see that in some of the mentality of some things. As an example, as part of my due diligence for what I'm doing for the people I'm working for, I knocked on some doors at some real estate agencies just to talk to them about buying real estate. And I said, I'm a buyer. I'm looking to buy some real estate in Czech Republic. Can you help me? And they said, and then basically they says, good luck, thank you, good luck. And they closed the door on me. They didn't want anything to do with me. And I would thought to myself, that's sort of interesting. And I learned there are some brokers that work with buyers. It's not typical out there. So, that said, it's there, there, as a country and as a real estate industry, there's a lot of positives. If you're under the age of 30, you can get a higher amount. You can finance a higher percentage of the purchase price based on age. 36 below, you can finance 80% of the purchase price versus if you're 36 and above. So it gears itself to younger people to buy. They do believe in building wealth through real estate. I talked a lot about how do you build wealth through real estate. I'm a big believer in building wealth through real estate. So in certain things, there are some certain commonalities, and they're certainly like that. But they're also, you're dealing with a country that doesn't have the history that we have, and our history as a real estate industry goes back 100 plus years.
Yeah.
So.
Wow, it's interesting that other markets dealing with agency representation, whether they have it or they don't, and how they navigate a transaction. I know we talk a lot about Australia in the same way, that this idea that, not having a buyer, that advocacy or that fiduciary responsibility or relationship with the buyers. It's interesting that other countries are having the conversation that we're entrenched in right now.
Right. Yeah. And I will say that said, if you go to Austria, which is the country next to the Czech Republic, they do have buyer representation there. So but Austria, remember, was part of the EU, and it wasn't part of the Iron Curtain. So that was that was one of the benefits. So they have a longer history of capitalism in that country. But you talk about buyer representation. I'm a huge believer in buyer representation. I mean, this is a complicated thing. The question I'm just going to tie this back a little bit. Your first negotiation you did, was that as successful as the last negotiation you did? Of course not. Yeah. Okay. We learned so much along the way. We talked about that today. A buyer coming into this being unrepresented, they're not going to know what the pitfalls of what they need to avoid and how to achieve what they want to achieve. That comes from experience. And that's the part where I think that buyer representation is so important, and that, and that as professionals, we need to make sure we can articulate that to our buyers. And that's a lot of what I did with when I was working in Prague. A lot of what I did was talk about that, like bring that to the forefront. I mean, everyone agreed with me when I can lay it out for them, but they didn't necessarily understand, that how to make that in action. And it's a process. I mean, it's not going to come overnight. It's a process for them.
Yeah. That's a process for us as well.
Absolutely.
So, okay, Richard, where can our audience, thank you for being here. I'm honored that you're on this podcast.
Well, thank you. I'm honored to do it.
Thank you. Where can our audience find you, connect with you?
Probably the best place is Instagram. My handle is mad4mid. So that is my Instagram handle. It's a closed account, but if you're in real estate, I'll accept you as you connect with me, and please do. I'm always looking to add new people.
Wonderful. Again, you are the master of connections, so I would love for our audience to take advantage and connect with you if they would like. So
thank you for having me.
Thank you once again.
Thank you.
So let's get our takeaways here. I could sit down and talk with Richard for hours, and I'm so fortunate that I've had that opportunity to do so over the past several years. But as we close, there are a few powerful ideas from Richard that are worth revisiting because they cut to the heart of what mastery and leadership really look like in real estate. Richard often talks about the Trinity, as we talked about: win, make money, and control the deal. And what's important to understand is that those aren't aggressive or selfish ideas. They're collaborative, professional, and mutually beneficial ones. Winning means advocating effectively on behalf of your client. Making money means creating value for the client, and controlling the deal means having the skills, the confidence, and experience to guide people through a complicated process with clarity, with calm, and from a position of strength. And that leads directly to the advice Richard has given us to shape the careers of thousands of agents in this industry. Learn and develop your skills. Confidence doesn't come from bravado, bluster, or faking it. It comes from knowing what you're doing. Competency. Real estate is a lifelong craft with a moving target. No two deals are the same, no two clients are the same, and the market is always changing. The professionals who last are the ones who commit to constant learning and surround themselves with the people who value growth, curiosity, and shared ideas. Relevance, too, comes from a place of generosity. Richard talks about being a connector, someone who brings people together without an agenda. When you connect the dots for others, you become indispensable. You stay top of mind not by talking about yourself. You stay relevant by being useful, by providing utility. And finally, what truly separates great agents and leaders is intention, going that extra mile, doing more than is expected, targeting each interaction like it matters deeply to the people involved, because it does. When we show up with that mindset, the work changes, the experience changes, and those you're leading feel protected, understood, and guided. And that's the path Richard's modeled through his career. And I'm only one of thousands of agents, leaders, staff, owners, and clients who've experienced and celebrated Richard's true and unique personality, personal mastery in the real estate industry. So thank you, Richard. I appreciate it. And that's Shear Line, everyone. As a reminder, you can support this show by following us, subscribing, rating, and reviewing the podcast on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. Just go to getmorenetwork.com, and there you can check out all of the amazing shows on the More Network, including past episodes of Shear Line. You can find me all over Instagram at archway.partners, as well as on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook at Eirik the Expert. You can connect with the Excelsior team at Brown Harris Stevens by going to bhsusa.com, and you can connect with my coaching company, Archway Partners Coaching, by visiting archwaypartnersinc.com to learn more about all of our coaching and training opportunities, as well as our brand new Mighty Networks Partners Experience, which is a growing community of agents with access to hours of content, including courses, modules, scripts, and tools, as well as weekly small group coaching with me live on the network. So remember, everyone, there's a key for every lock, but it's the right combination of grooves, cuts, and teeth that lift the pins and create the shear line. Until next time, keep turning curiosity into connection, mystery into mastery, and keep unlocking what's possible. We'll see you next time, everybody.
What do you really need to know about buying or selling a home? First, it's serious business, and it's complicated. There's a lot of money on the table, and emotion too. You need an agent who knows the ropes. So, whether you're buying or selling your home, work with professionals who have a mastery of the craft.